All right, Reagan Dunn. You and I talked, I guess it was probably April or something, because here's the letter, January 7th, 2025. You said, hey, let's audit. Let's look into these King County Department of Community and Health Services for the community-based nonprofit juvenile diversion services, including controversial restorative community pathways. The latest audit plan comes in response to request that you had put out. Finally, ta-da! Reagan Dunn, you got the audit, and I'm sure everything is just peachy keen with the money that has been spent on all of these restorative justice programs. What'd you find, my friend?
Well, as you know, I made that audit request to the county auditor back at the beginning of the year, and I made a similar request 2 years ago to the state auditor to look at this. And what we have, John, and I'm not overstating this, it's an unmitigated disaster. It is one of the worst audits I've ever seen. And as you know, the background here is after the George Floyd incident and the real challenges back about 4 or 5 years ago, the county decided to do all kinds of micro grants out into the community to some of these historically underrepresented groups. Started out with $22 million or so, and it ballooned to $1.5 billion in high-risk, unsecured grants through King County, about 1/6 of our total annual budget. And
in the span of how many years was $1.6 billion spent? Was that over like 6-year period or a 5-year period?
$1.5 billion over the last 18 months. And it went from 22 million to 1.5 billion.
Oh my God.
And then, of course, the policies behind them are really bad, like restorative community pathways and a lot of other programs that just go out to community groups. We can talk about those in a minute. But what happened was the auditor found disastrous consequences, evidence of fraud, altered receipts, cash withdrawals, all kinds of going above and beyond the scope of the contract, no documentation, forged documentation, to the tune of, and I think it's fair to say, tens of millions of dollars of fraud, waste, and abuse, but certainly millions, many millions. And the auditor came and told us all this on Tuesday. And so obviously, you know, we've been talking about these programs as bad. We are now talking on your show about their fiscal mismanagement, which is substantial and which we need to do something about.
Something sort of piqued your interest to begin this request for this audit. You had been quietly sort of behind the scenes hearing stories. Kids would be sent to these things. They would never get in touch with anybody. There was no follow-up. Nobody seemed to care necessarily. And you sort of saw a pattern of malfeasance. And then you thought, well, okay, what are the metrics on this? I remember some people from one of the organizations, it might have been Community Pathways, and I don't want to put the words in their mouth if it's not theirs. It was basically like, we don't need to be accountable to you because you guys are part of the system and you are part of the problem. So don't be questioning what we're doing with our money because you are the problem and we're going to solve this on our own. You don't need to worry about us. So this thing just kept growing and growing. So you asked for this. It took you a long time to get this audit, Reagan Dunn.
Yeah, I asked twice, two different auditors. It took 2 years. I finally got a Democrat, Rod Dombowski, to join with me, and I forced the issue before the county council. And by the time that pressure was put on them and they had to vote, I did get a unanimous approval of my legislation to do the audit. The audit showed what, you know, I feared. Look, I'm a former federal prosecutor in 3 jurisdictions. I can tell you where there's smoke, there's generally fire. We knew the metrics on these programs were bad, including 40% of these juveniles who have committed, in some cases, violent crimes, not even showing up to the diversion program at all. We know that there is a 53% recidivism rate for the felonies in just 2 years. I mean, it's not working. Not only is it not working, there's no transparency to it. There's no accountability. And so finally the audit said, hey, yeah, there is no transparency. There is no accountability. There's out and out fraud here, in our opinion, according to the auditor. And so what worries me the most here is a couple things. One, King County is doing a really, really bad job at administering and supervising the public's money. taxpayer dollars. A lot of it, $1.5 billion. So that's one concern. Second concern is that the programs aren't doing any good, and that is a significant problem. And this is what I want you to just think about for a second, John. 18,000 employees of King County government, okay? Right now, the policy is that you need to come to work 1 day a week. You can work from home the rest of the time. And what the county is beginning to do is just simply use subcontractors, like these grant recipient agencies, to do the county's work. They're union protected. They can't be fired. They work from home. And they're asking for 5 new tax increases this year alone to add to the $9.5 billion that the state has increased taxes this year. It is a very serious problem, requires far more oversight than we're giving it now. And this audit is just the tip of the iceberg, unfortunately.
Sometimes you don't want to lift up these rocks to find out what's underneath, because then you've got another problem, right? As long as the rock's sitting on top, then we don't have to worry about the termites or something else that's causing the problems. I know Dow Constantine was a big supporter of these programs. He went on a number of shows. He did press conferences, and he was going to. There was systemic racism that was running throughout this system, and this was him, turning back and addressing 400 years of oppression and the rest of the stuff. So then he takes the money, spending in 2021, King County allocated $16 million to restorative community pathways, and then you looked at the numbers and you saw these. It's not working. There's no metrics, and when they were being asked, where are your metrics? They said, don't bother us. Don't worry. It's all working. So the amount of money is just mind-boggling that it goes out. Is there not a rule in place that there needs to be an audit of programs annually? Shouldn't this just be something that Reagan Dunn from King County Council doesn't have to call and beg and request numerous times to get an audit on something? Shouldn't they be auditing all the time, all of this money, whether it's this program or some other program?
Yeah, well, the standard is 33% of the programs need to be reviewed carefully every year. DCHS, the agency that was asked to do this, audited in 1 year 1%, okay? And so it is not looked at. There were standards in place for DCHS, which is a county agency, but they didn't adhere to their own standards. So I proposed legislation here just yesterday that will take best practices from across the country and also from the federal government that require DCHS and the rest of the county grant-making agencies to adhere to these high-level standards on the way out the door. That's one part of it. So actually, King County's got to clean up our side of the street. I'm in the minority here. I'm leading the opposition, and I voted against most of these programs. But to be fair, I work for King County. We got to clean up our side of the street. But we got real problems on the other side of the street for recipients that, and most are good recipients. But the ones that are bad are really bad. And what's interesting, John, in the last 24 hours since this issue blew up, I have gotten case after case, example after example of things that would shock your conscience, to the point where I am probably going to go ahead and have to do this. Only the second time I've ever done it in my career. Write a letter to the FBI. I'm going to have to get the feds involved. The last time I did it, people were prosecuted, went to trial, and went to jail. That's where I'm at now. I'm very frustrated. It's about trust and accountability of the public and their tax dollars being spent wisely. And King County is so bloated, so out of control, so working from home, not in the office, delegating to unsupervised groups, to a point where I can't believe anyone would vote for tax increases right now for King County, to be honest.
So without mentioning any names, give me an example to blow my mind or shock the conscience of the court of some of the shenanigans that were going on with, say, billing and then checks being cut.
Well, the auditor did some backtrack changes. You know, that old trick where you go back and look at what they did, and somebody had submitted $7,000 reimbursement, and then when the auditor asked, they changed it to a $1,000 reimbursement. So they're falsifying this. What I heard today, John, and there's so many of them so what happens is everybody comes out of the woodwork when this stuff blows up,
right.
Blowing up. People are pointing fingers, but for example, children of grant recipients getting high-level salaries from these programs and then not working, perhaps driving super expensive, high-quality luxury cars would be one of the examples, living lavish lifestyles. I mean, this is Exhibit A on public malfeasance. And so, excuse me, sorry, that's what we focus on.
Right. And I was looking at the list of the stuff that you had put out there, billing for $10,000 when really was only worth $1,000, checks just simply going out, putting family members on payroll, and then not having anybody be accountable to the hours that were being served. This is just, people will do what you expect or what you inspect. People will do what you inspect, and that is an auditor saying, well, where's this money going? But if it's not your money and nobody's checking, what does it matter? So it's like somebody stealing from the till. You work at the bar, you take $10 out at the end of the day, and you're like, well, what's now? 10, I need 20. And then 20 becomes 100, and the next thing you know, 2 years later, the place is out of business because people have been robbing the cash register, right? But the beauty part of government is the cash register never gets empty. There's always someone to fill the register. So with this audit, getting the rock rolling on this one, and maybe I'm going to put you on the spot on this one, Reagan Dunn, other than getting in touch with the FBI, are you going to start to ask for accounting of some of these other different divisions other than this one that's handling the restorative justice and the rest of it?
Yeah, well, we'll continue. First of all, this legislation I'm putting forward is going to apply to all of the grant-making agencies across the board. There's some best practices that have been developed by NACO, the National Association of Counties, and from the U.S. Department of Justice, a few others. We'll want to put those in place. But yeah, I mean, the theory of prosecution is deterrence, right? As a former federal prosecutor, I could tell you that. We need to make some examples of some of these bad actors. But you're right. If there is no oversight, if there is only 1%, for example, of these programs, and you're talking hundreds and hundreds of programs, the majority just funded all of their friends and all of their nonprofits out in the community, there's going to be some real problems. And so I hope that both the local prosecutor and our law enforcement, all the feds, don't make the mistake of letting this one pass, because what's going to happen is I'm going to turn up some pretty ugly stuff, and I will continue to drill down on it. So the only thing the county can do is dramatically improve its grant-making, security, oversight, transparency, and operations. I got legislation to do it. We're going to have to hold some people accountable. That's not really my role as a council member. Occasionally I'll gesture in that direction and add help, but it sure sends a bad picture when I know that 18,000 employees in King County aren't showing up to work because their leaders aren't requiring them to. Good people. We all know that, if you work from home, you just got to show up at the office one day a week. You're going to mow the lawn. You're going to do a bunch of stuff. You might put in 3 or 4 hours a day managing your grant recipients, because that work's no longer in-house in King County. We figured out a way to just contract it out. It's a real problem.
So, Reagan, who could call for the 18,000 employees to return back to work? I'm assuming that at this point, the 6-foot distance that was made up by Fauci, the masks have gone away, the hand washing and the rest. Can everybody come back? And who would call them all back?
Well, so the county got in such trouble financially from a fiscal perspective. They started jettisoning office space. They started cutting leases. They tried to balance the budget by just closing up their fiscal operation, okay? And by doing this, by contracting and using, there's all these professional contractors that orbit around governments to try and get pieces of the action, right? It's kind of the industrial nonprofit group. Some of them, and most of them, I want to be clear, most of them are real good, okay? And we all know the faith-based nonprofits. We all know those low-level. Habitat for Humanity is an example of a great one.
Yes.
There's a lot of others, right, that are doing a really good job, but there's these new ones that are focused on, like, restorative human pathways, criminal justice, all of this stuff that have no record of success. So in some cases, unwilling to provide data. All of this has got to be a wholesale change. The executive, to her credit, said she's going to work with me on this, because I used to work at a federal grant-making agency. We're going to try and clean up first our side of the street in King County, and then we're going to have to cull away these grant recipients that just clearly aren't doing a good job.
I would look into the King County Housing Authority next.
Well, yeah, the homeless authority is Exhibit B. I mean, that's a bad job. There's a lot of stuff I have to work through here, but first and foremost, see, if the majority party doesn't want to give me an audit, they won't. If they don't want to give me a hearing, say for example, to keep the juvenile jail open, they won't. It takes a lot of guerrilla tactics from my perspective to try and get these hearings, get these audits. So when you get them, you got to take advantage of them and move on. So,
well,
anyway, that's what we're working on.
You'll be continuing to be the skunk at the garden party, Reagan Dunn, but I think that's something that's you're sort of used to. So, but the good news is Dale Constantine is now running Sound Transit, so I'm sure we won't have any sort of problems over there.
No problem at all. More light rail to West Seattle. Let's take that over.